going to call to order the Finance and Audit Committee meeting and read the statement of announcement. A meeting notice announcing the date, time, and place of June 5th Finance and Audit Committee meeting was distributed June 3rd, 2020 to appropriate media and other groups or individuals who have requested notification. The announcement and agenda were posted at the Department of Disabilities and Special Needs Central and on the website. If everybody can mute, we're just getting some background noise. All right, so everyone has the agenda, and I'd like to ask, see if anyone can make a motion to adopt the agenda for today's meeting.
So moved.
Can I get a second?
Second.
Okay, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? The agenda passed as written. The next item is are the minutes from April 28th meeting. I need to get a motion to adopt the minutes from April 28th. Can I get a second?
Second.
All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Minutes are approved. Our next item is the discussion of outlier funding options that Chris Clark is going to lead for us.
All right. Well, for the purpose of the new committee members, first welcome. And another thing I want to apologize for is we are loaded down with acronyms here. I'll try my best not to use too many of them. If I do and you're like, what does that mean? Remind me that you need to know what I'm talking about. But so the situation, a little background information in regards to Outliers and the band system. The band system started back in the mid 90s, late 90s, where providers had, prior to that, negotiate individual program budgets on a house by house, program by program, agency by agency basis. So it was very, very tedious, time consuming, and involved. And so they came up with the capitated funding system. And at that time, they took all the average cost statewide and redistributed those funds in 5 bands. Those 5 bands were geared towards basically, they identified the needs of the consumer, cross-mapped them or mapped them to an underlying band, and those bands were supposed to be an all-inclusive capitated payment for all services that consumer may need. Knowing that there are folks that require a lot more attention than others, they realized when they put this system in place, which they probably were modeling after another state, I don't know what other states they might have been looking at, but they realized that providers, which we have 39 providers that we work with that are DSN boards, and they vary in big time in size as well as types of programs they operate. But they realized that folks would say, wait a minute, you're going to give me, back in the day, let's say it was $50,000 for the highest residential band, you're going to give me this money, and it's going to cost me $100,000 to serve this person. Hit mute all at the top, Mary.
I did.
He just muted her. So anyways, so they created this outlier concept, which was basically the goal was to, for any really high cost consumer, give supplemental dollars to that agency to serve them, so that they didn't have a hard time finding folks willing to serve the high cost consumers that were out there. So minus the outlier system, you would have had a lot of providers going, wait a minute, I'm not willing to serve this person. You don't give me enough money. And so that's why they did that. Now the issue is that process is very old and broken and really hasn't kept up with the times. From a provider perspective, I've been in the system as a finance director or CPA consultant or auditor since 1994. Well, 89 is when I started with another CPA firm, but really in it in 94. This system has not kept up with the times, and from my experience with it outside before I came in, it appeared and it smacked of favoritism. That I saw a lot of that because I was working with 23 of the 39 agencies, so I could easily see kind of what decisions were being made because of that broad view. And so when I came in, one of the first things I had issue with was the outlier process, and I'm like, we got to look at this. So anyways, we started looking at it. I put a pause on it. We started looking at it, but we quickly realized that there were a lot more issues and things that we need to figure out to not only fix the system, but make it transparent, make it fair, make it equitable, make it predictable, and all those things that are positive. Because right now, I think most providers would tell you that the outlier system is horrible and it's broken and they don't like it.
Why isn't it matched?
What's that?
Why aren't the dollars
Yeah,
matched?
I'll get into that. We can jump in now, I guess. But so the outlier funds, we have one residential rate for the most part. We have two, but for the one rate that we have for one of our services is an hourly rate for a SLP type service, which is very little of our revenue. But all of our other residential rates, there's I don't know, 5 or 6 residential rates, and we pay out a certain amount, but we only get to bill one amount per day. And so we are billing Medicaid one rate for every single ICF, CRCF, CTH2s. There's some acronyms for you. And so the issue is we're only able to draw down match dollars because the rate that we have with Medicaid has nothing to do with what we pay our providers. They're totally detached. So we're basically putting a rate out on the street and hoping to generate revenues back from Medicaid to make it up. Well, what's happened is over the years, I guess they were looking at average people in these rates, that it will work out, that we would somehow lose money on some and make money on others, but in the end it would wash. Plus there was a two-way settlement process with our cost reporting, which took a lot of the need to monitor rates out of the equation, because with the two-way settlement, as long as you incurred your cost, you were paid. Once you filed your cost reports, they wrote you a check for $10 million or whatever they owed you. And so it made a lot of laziness as far as how the rates were managed, because there was really no, other than cash flow, there was really no incentive to manage the rates. I mean, other than getting your money every month, you're going to get your money eventually. Other than saying, wait a minute, we can't pay our bills because cash flow is killing us. There was no reason to look at those rates. And so when we started, we realized those rates have atrophied, and the need to match the outliers and to get outliers matched was never addressed, because they were able to get that money when they filed their cost reports. And so we only have one residential rate, and the fact that we don't have 3, 4, 5, 6 different rates with Medicaid does not allow us to draw down outlier dollars for those when we pay them out. So our current, we get about around $75,000 a year. It's $200 a day around now, and 365 days. It's around $75,000 is all we generate in residential rates. So when we have bands that, our bands are $80,000 for a band G, $99,000 for a band H, $105,000 for a R, and $106,000 for a T. Not a single one of those rates, all of them are higher than what we even are able to bill. So we are losing on residential day one from the minute we put money on the streets. And so when we talk in our commission meeting that we have a revenue problem, this is what we're talking about, that we're not generating our revenues we need to generate. And so as a result, one of Mary's key goals, I guess, is to get an acuity-based rate system with HHS so that we can model our payout structure that we need to have. And I say what we need to have because we realize what we have still isn't actually great either. But the model that we're moving towards, what we need to have to be successful in a fee-for-service environment. And so when we spend this, all right, so another thing, I'll just go down my talking points now that I've given you some background. Fiscal year 19, DDSN ended up with $157,000 in the bank. That last 2 hours based on our budget. That's how much money we had, was enough to last 2 hours. Obviously, that's not a healthy cash reserve. We spend this year right now, if you look at our current contracts, we have $4.2 million in residential funded outliers. We get zero of that money back from HHS, so it's entirely state funded. We have $2.9 million in at-home funded outliers. So in total, we have over $7 million in outliers. Now the at-home funded outliers, we're not going to dig into. Number one, we don't lose money on those because of the way the whole band system works with those. When we flip those bands B's and I's, that'll go away. So we're not going to spend any time fixing something that we're in the middle of converting anyway. So that would be kind of a waste of energy. So we're really focused on the residential outliers. So instead of spending $1.3 million on those outliers, if we could match it, we're having to spend the 4.2. So that's costing us $2.9 million in additional appropriation. If we could take that $2.9 million and match it and make these $4.2 million effective, we could draw down another $7 million in federal funds. But because we're inefficient in our residential rate structure, we have to use all of our state dollars, therefore handcuffing our ability to draw down that $7 million in other service lines. So for every dollar we spend on an outlier, we result in losing $3 of billable ability because of the match, the value of the match. So to fund outliers right now, without any cash available, basically we would have to have attrition with our previously funded outliers. In other words, if I start with a bucket of 0 and I have an outlier request, what am I going to pay it with?
Right.
I have nothing. So that's basically where we were in June. Things have gotten better, but still, just to give you some background, because here we are in May and June talking about it, that's where we were. We didn't know how we were going to end up this year, so we just kind of had to put a pause to it to figure out how much money we were going to do and how well we were going to do this year. So the only money we would have had is from deaths, people leaving the state, people checking themselves out of services, somehow otherwise losing their funding. So that was the only money we really have available. The existing directive that we have, there is a directive 250-11DD, and that is on our website. 250-11DD is our directive related to outlier funding, and it needs much work. It's not a bad directive. It just leaves so much unaddressed and doesn't really position us to have a good system. In that directive, it states that before providers request funds from us, they should look internal to their organization to make sure they don't have savings serving other people. So, in other words, if I'm paying someone, and I might exaggerate it for making an example, let's say I'm paying for 50 people and an agency makes $200,000 on those 50 people, but then they have this 51st person and they're losing $30,000 on it. The capitated system by design is a law of averages. So you can't say, oh, well, just ignore that we made all this money on these 50. Just look at this one person I'm asking you to look at. The system is not geared towards you balancing your budget or making money on every single person one-off. It's more of a global thing. Also, our contracts state, right in the contracts, use of savings. If the cost for all services provided in this contract are less than funds available to the provider shall utilize uncommitted funds, cost savings to enhance services to consumers, improve quality of services, serve consumers on the waiting list, or fund provider reserves. the contract also states that this is a capitated system and you're supposed to use funds that we pay you under this contract to meet needs of more than just each individual person in a one-off basis. The existing outlier structure is riddled with problems. We have inefficiencies in the review and approval process. It lacks transparency to providers so they can see how much money we have, what we've awarded, how much money we have spent out. Has lack of consistent application. In other words, because the process is not very good, depending on who's applying it, you can get different results. Lack of accountability. Once an outlier is funded, to validate and do like on-site visits to see staffing and other things are in place that you're paying for. Lack of formal review procedures. Lack of usage of any kind of assessment or fiscal programmatic need review to determine if an outlier should be funded or not. Lack of a funding mechanism. In other words, where's this money coming from versus, out-of-state appropriations. Lack of consideration of provider existing cash reserves or surpluses that should be factored into the decision making, and lack of fiscal review of operational deficits to determine the cause for an agency losing money. So in other words, just because an agency is losing money does not mean that they are not funded properly. It can be due to poor staffing ratios, poor administrative structures, just a host of different things. And, as far as if I'm an individual provider, and I'm not trying to defend them, but they only know what they do. They don't have a view on what other boards are doing. So if I'm an agency executive director or finance director, I know my agency. So it's not easy for me to spot things that are out of whack. And so we have a picture of the entire state and we can easily spot those things. So when we're determining whether to give somebody an outlier, and let's say their agency's struggling, we shouldn't just be throwing a bunch of money at an agency when they've got things they need to do in-house to correct their own budget. And so we're lacking that process. We also have not developed staffing pattern expectations that are tied to funding decisions, and Pat's really good to speak about this if he wants to jump in at some point, but basically all outliers are tied to staffing levels. I mean, that's where the cost is coming from. It's not diapers, it's not food they're eating, it's staff. And so not having definitive staffing patterns tied to funding decisions is a problem. There's a lack of a formal assessment process to be used by all and appropriately and consistently applied. And so some of the assessments out there are ICAP, HRST, and others. And those are not being used currently to make those decisions. So in conclusion, the process has shown us, this process of reviewing our situation shows that we have a lack of uniform acuity scale, lack of definitive expectations, and inadequate rate structure to support a matchable rate. With that being said, what we need to do is look at a solution and a path forward. So what we need to do, again, two outlier issues, residential and at home. At home is going to resolve itself because we intend to go fee for service for them early in fiscal year 21. So we need to only focus on residential.
And before everybody gets upset out in the people who are listening to this broadcast, we do realize that there are outliers for day program attendees. So those folks, we need to look at a difficulty of care rate for them. We haven't forgotten about them. Right. So when we say that this is going to resolve itself, we do understand that there's a secondary issue of band payments that are higher with outliers because of an individual's needs at the day program, which we will address. But the other things, because of personal care aid, for respite, for in-home supports, all the other things that drive that budget up, that will take care of itself in a fee-for-service world. And you have to all remember that you already get an outlier for all individuals who have nursing. DDSN's we've already taken that out of the band. So in essence, you're not funding that. We already have done that. So, okay, I just didn't want folks to get upset because of the.
Yeah, so this-
Day program.
Yeah, this process is entirely focused on fixing residential outliers, and you're right, that is a subtopic, and my brain wasn't there, but
That's,
as far as a residential process, really trying to figure out how we're going to march forward. And so before I get into that, Pat, did you want to do any more background information before we start talking about a path forward?
I think you've loaded them up quite well with the background.
Okay. So a path forward, we need to identify a pot of money that we can use as seed money, and Pat calls it a lockbox. And so we need like an outlier lockbox where basically we have seed money in it. And once we've put money in that lockbox, it's strictly used for outlier funding, and it is replenished by folks leaving the outlier funding system, whether it be the reasons I mentioned earlier, or during the rejustification process. Keep in mind that people's needs change. So we do have a rejustification process. What that means is once you get an outlier, it's not like it's yours forever and we don't ever look at it again. You have to look at it annually. Some are 18 months. And so through that rejustification process, if we do a site visit or we look at their financials and we decide that they're not spending the money or using the money in the manner that they said they were, then we would retrieve those funds and put it back in the lockbox. So the pot would be a perpetual self-funded pot. And as we would move to this new system, we realize we've got, like I said, $4.3 million in residential outliers that are out there right now. We would grandfather those. This is a proposal. This is kind of where we're thinking on this right now. This isn't all set in stone. We're thinking out loud almost as far as what we're contemplating. So the boards that have outliers would keep them, and the only review we would do with them is the already existing rejustification review that we've already talked about. It's in our system. It's already existing, but we paused that process as well because we wanted to discuss whether we wanted to start using the HRST or an ICAP or something, and we haven't made that decision either. But we got to restart that rejustification process, so that would be the only scrutiny they would get, which is identical to what they've always gotten. So we're not talking about pulling anybody's existing funds. Then path forward, okay, new outliers. We would come up with a metric to determine whether a board is financially stable or unstable, looking primarily at their cash balance. If they're considered financially stable, it's a non-starter, that we would not even consider outlier submissions from that agency. And the reason is, back to the contract language, back to the theory of capitated funding, back to our contract and directive. The way they built that cash is because we have, in essence, overpaid them or excess funded money to them in excess of the services needed that they had to pay for. Now, some boards do have local dollars that they get, but they don't account for this kind of cash balance that providers build up over time. We're kind of leaning towards like a month of cash or a month and a half of cash, something like that. We also require providers to send in quarterly reports, and they're very, very simple. They're basically 5 numbers, I think, that they have to turn in. And we will keep an eye on their interim numbers as well. So let's say, for example, somebody was doing really well in their audit, or they were marginal, and we look at their their quarterly financial they've turned in, and they're having a really bad year. We would look at that cash balance, not the one that was on their audit. Because if somebody's drowning, we don't need to wait till they drown to try and resuscitate them. We need to help them as soon as we determine they're having problems. So once we determine they're unstable or they're having some issues, and we've already done this. This is kind of something we're already in the process and have accomplished. Debbie and I, as a team at this time, and team of 2, but hopefully a team of 3 coming. We have hired a new cost analysis manager that starts in 2 weeks, I guess. But right now, she and I are kind of tag teaming this. We get a bunch of information from these providers that are struggling, and we review all their operations, staffing, and all kinds of stuff. And we then write a letter to the board of directors and the executive director with a specific corrective action plan recommendations. And the boards that we've worked with thus far have been very, very responsive. They've implemented these suggestions. Not every single, we try and give them enough that they can kind of pick and choose and not have to do everything to turn the agency around. And the ones that have done it are doing very, very well right now. Now, coupled with that, if there are funding issues as well, let's say that provider's struggling, and yes, we identify operational issues, that doesn't mean we're not also going to look at funding issues as well. So it could be that we have funding issues and operational issues, and we don't want to put all the money, all the responsibility in the provider just to fix their finances when we know we're not funding them properly for some of their folks. So we'll run those assessments simultaneously.
And what we have found, and we're basing this on the history that we have had with boards previously to get them on the right side of their finances. So we say, go ahead and submit your band changes or your outlier requests for the ones that you believe qualify for these services, while we are simultaneously looking at how you are operationally running at this point. And what we have found is, overstaffed. We have found more on the operational side, and we have not funded a lot of, in fact, one board, we turned down all their requests. But I think that previously, the way things have been handled for boards who are struggling is, we'll just change your bands and we'll give you more cash. But if you don't fix the operations side where they're not doing things properly in the first place, that cash is going to get sucked right into that machine and be gone. So we want everybody to be successful. And to do that, you've got to run correctly and efficiently, as well as be properly funded. And we have found in a few cases that the funding for the individuals that was short. So we had to fix that. And so basically we want to look at two things. And it just follows the same path we've been going anyway to help boards get on the right side of the plus side of operations.
Yeah, you talked about that.
Yeah, and so this will just go into it.
Improving training
Mm-hmm.
for boards who, need, better resources and information so that they can be
Right.
effective.
And we want everybody to be efficient, effective, and very, very successful. But the other thing that is new and that we have talked to the board about is that when we send these letters that we are going to start looking at finances, we're also sending to the board of directors there, the executive director and the board of director. We want everybody to be, the executive director is going to need the support of their board to make these changes. And they need to be aware of what changes need to happen, because they're not all going to be easy. When you start messing around with personnel issues and staffing patterns, people get a little upset. So the executive director is going to need their board support to do this. So it's just, again, trying to be transparent about things as much as humanly possible without letting out the names of the individuals, because you can't do that. Sorry, Chris.
That's good. And, again, I want to reiterate, I think there's a risk of somebody labeling somebody as a bad manager or mismanagement. And I think a lot of the issues we find is just, again, you don't have a perspective. You only know your agency. And so we find that they just hadn't thought of things, weren't aware of things, hadn't dawned on them, hadn't looked at it like that, those types of issues. So, these boards that are asking for help, it's a very collaborative effort. I mean, Debbie is making site visits, sitting down, and it's really been a very good process, wouldn't you say? So anyways, so we're looking at both. We'll look at that. We're not going to start throwing money at a problem. We're going to try and fix the problem if there is one. All right, and then so once that's done, the issue we have to figure out is, okay, yeah, you need some funding. Now, how much do I give you? So in the $4.2 million, we've got outliers as high as $180,000 that are outlier funds. So if you look at a band H, which is 99,000, you add 180 to it, that's how much we're paying for that person. And we're drawing down $73,000. So, the outliers are all over the place. So the next part of the review is, okay, great, you're asking for an outlier, you're asking me for 80,000, how did you get this number? And do we agree that you've calculated it properly? While we're doing that, we're also gonna have a programmatic review going on, which is a real hard part, because we do want to use an assessment at some point, but right now we just can't land on really implementing that in a quick manner.
So we're going to have to look at each person on an individual basis, especially with these outliers. I mean, the ones that really are so far out of the average amount. We're going to have to look closely at those just to make sure they're justified, because it's such a large amount of money. That what is constituting that level of care for that person. So we're going to have to go back in and look at those and revalidate those for sure.
But if I could interject, just to
Yes.
clarify something there, that you're talking about right there, Mary, in terms of closely looking at that, you're talking about the future outlier request or the existing requests that Chris was just saying are going to be grandfathered in?
Well, they're going to be grandfathered in, but they have to be rejustified every year. So when they're rejustified, we're going to look at really what constitutes the need for this
Okay.
level of outlier. Yeah.
Gotcha. Okay.
We're just
So
going
it's
to
not
look
a-
more closely at them. We're not going to rubber stamp them as they've been done in the past.
Gotcha. Okay. Thank you for clarifying that for me.
And so once they clear those hurdles and they're in the approved status and we know an amount, then we have to look at our funding availability and prioritize all those that have come in that have gotten approved. And so we have to work through all that. But that's basically where we are on the process. Again, another thing we're thinking about is maybe only accepting these requests twice a year or quarterly or something like that, because them just coming in and arriving daily, at random is really hard, because if you receive one, if you throw it on a shelf, the information gets stale, and you get around, if you're even only reviewing it twice a year, the information needs to be more current than something that's potentially 6 months old. So I'm gonna let Pat's got some really good perspective on this. I don't know if you have anything to add, to kind of put a bow on this.
Maybe to put a bow on it would be, what you just heard was, I know it in depthly, and I'm hanging on to what Chris says to really follow all the details. It's, if I'm sitting in your chair, I'm saying, well, what does a good system look like? What should we be? And this is where Mary's trying to build the steps to get us to a good system. And a good system looks like you have an assessment tool that accurately and fairly in a standardized way measures people's acuity level and from low to high. And so when you go in a residential setting, to get a high acuity level and you get a higher payment, it means you have more staffing.
Right.
Our system has no mechanism to equate staffing to dollars. So in the future, when you do that correctly, then all of a sudden you get that solid foundation, and then you will have, let's say, 4 consumers in a residence, and they may be evaluated slightly. You go to a chart, you look at the chart, and the chart will give you the minimum and maximum hours per day that should be in that house. So it gives the provider the flexibility of staffing it to meet needs, but it also creates a floor so that our consumers are not underserved. And also creates a maximum, meaning if you get above that maximum, then you can call us for an outlier. And what these systems have found is once you do the front end math work correctly, then when the system runs, you don't run with all these crazy exceptions that we have to deal with. You actually have a system that works where you get people in the right house, you get them in the right money. And guess what? Right now, we don't have a floor. Our people are at risk of being underserved because we can't measure that. So going forward, we're going to protect against the underserving. And when people get above that high level, we've already built in, if you're putting in maximum 38, that probably means you're spending 80% of that money's house on your direct labor force, which means, hey, you probably are losing money. Send in the application. So, but instead of getting 100, we get 3. So going forward, the whole goal is to squeeze down the outliers so that we don't get them by having a better system. The fact that we have so many outliers means we have a leaky system.
And the better perfect scenario is that our rates that we get from Medicaid are tied to those
Right.
acuity levels you're talking about, which right now it's one rate.
Crazy math.
PIBA, you familiar with PIBA
We
system?
are.
They have, my wife is the mayor of Maysville, and they have a very good tracking system. And they do it monthly, and then quarterly, you have to now take those 3 months, and everything is done on the computer so that it's trackable. So that if a person gets out of line, it's almost like the IRS system. It'll actually, the computer is built to kick it out to a person so that they can further evaluate that.
Okay.
So there are models already
Right.
in existence, and PIBA has a very good system.
Right.
It looks complicated, but it gives you what you were talking
Yeah,
about.
that's kind of like a managed care model where they look at the highs and lows and look at the extremes. Yes,
Absolutely.
yes,
I think we need to look at their system.
unequivocally.
So we're not really bringing a strategy or a plan. We want this to be an open conversation as we go back to the drawing board and see if you think we're on the right path. We need to start this sooner than later because it's been in pause mode since I got here in June, and I'm not sure who was even when the time was prior to me getting here that they looked at these things. So it's an issue. I know there's providers out there that are clamoring for some type of process to be announced and it get started.
Well, and we also
So-
run this by them through the committee process of just talking to them about how do they feel about this. And because you don't want to penalize the folks that are managing well and doing a good job. You don't want to incentivize, the wrong thing. You got to be very careful when you do stuff like this. So we want to make sure that we have that conversation and show them what our intent is, knowing that our goal is to get to individualized rates that match closely to the individual's needs. And then if we could do that, then we wouldn't be losing money on every day served in residential. And we would be better stewards of the taxpayer dollar because we would be matching all of it versus just letting it sit there. So that's the ultimate goal.
Yeah, and a similar argument is if I'm a provider that's healthy, I'm like, why are you giving all the money to those that aren't managed well? So there's a no-win situation. If you're helping the people that are not financially stable and not operating, they're losing money or whatever, there's an argument there as to, well, why are you helping them? They need to, be better managers. And then if you're a good manager, well, why are you not giving me money just because I'm a good manager? So there's you can't win.
From doing anything here. We're never going to get everybody on board, that everybody's going to be happy. But ultimately, we want to make sure that the services provided for the individual meets the individual's needs. Because again, that's our focus. That person that we're supporting has got to be always our end focus. So to do that, but we have to question some of these really high numbers to see, how'd you arrive at that? And how did we approve that? And those are the things that we're just going to take them as they come up. But again, the philosophy is not, let's just change dollars. Let's just give you money. The philosophy is, if you're not fishing correctly, let me teach you how to fish right. And then that way you will generate your own money because you've got your operations back in order. So, you asked for an update on Outliers, and that's it. That's what.
How do we pay these when we have no money to pay?
My question is, are we going to continue to fund Outliers even though we don't have a process? What the reason that I think one of the reasons we wanted to put this on the agenda today was we were trying to, since this was a new fiscal year, we were trying to figure out what Outliers we were going to, other than the ones that have, are we just going to continue to fund even though we don't have a process? Because the way I'm thinking from what we've talked about in the last 30 minutes is we're looking at another year before a process is finished. Is that right? Or are we talking about months?
No, we can implement something. In fact, the process already exists. It's just nobody here likes it and thinks it's broken. And so We could very
The
easily
process
just,
is broken that we're using now. There's no question about it. So my question is, how long is it going to take us to get to a system that is more like what we were talking about, which is that we only give people money that need it, but we don't want to penalize people that just because they have money, just like you were talking about, Chris, because that discourages people from spending their money properly in a way, because you're like, well, I'll just throw my money away and then I'll get an outlier. We don't want to do that either. So this is a complicated process as to figure out how really is the best way to do it. But the thing is, we just don't want to keep throwing money at it and just approving these things that have just because they've been approved in the past, like we talked about before. And that's why we brought it up now, because it was the beginning of the year and we were just trying to figure out what we were going to do for this next 12 months outlier situation. But then we're saying that we're going to, if I'm not mistaken, we're saying we're going to fund all those like normal. Is that true? Or I'm confused a little bit.
And Barry, funding them like normal, we
I
don't
thought
just
it started off at the beginning of the year with 0, and then you reapproved everybody.
No, they come up when their approval date comes up. So as their approval dates come up, we're going to evaluate them closely. That has not really been done in the past. So we're going to make sure that the outlier is required, that the funding is actually the dollar amount that they come up with is correct. And then we're going to approve them or not approve them at that point. But as they come up in their normal cycle over the course of the year.
well,
We don't just start at 0 at the beginning of the fiscal year. That's never been done that way.
she said that we've not done that. DSN has done that. I just don't think it's been done from a manner that had any meaningfulness or consistency to it. Having been a person that has turned in a rejustification packet, the process just is not, we're not asked to provide payroll registers. We're not asked to provide an income statement for the house that the consumer lives in. We're not asked to look at current cash balances or anything. It's
They
just
haven't been able
straight
to
up.
verify anything, correct? I mean, it's just been an amazing, just come get the money that's available. If you're in
It's writing a story is how, like Mary says, whoever's the best story writer.
Yeah, I mean,
It's really sad situation that we used to work that way, but I realize we're trying to fix it, and I'm thankful we're trying to fix it. I'm not ridiculing us. I'm saying the way they did it in the past is absurd, but I'm just trying to. I do think that one of the best things you said today, Chris, was that we need to do it we need to not let people come in except on a quarterly basis to give to view for an outlier, so that we'll have a system, a semi-annual or a quarterly basis, so that we don't just have these people just willy-nilly asking for these outliers every month, and then 12 months later we have to reevaluate every 12 months. If you did it on a quarterly basis, then you would only be reevaluating every quarter. See what I'm saying?
Right.
I think that'd be a much smarter way to do it. Because that way you wouldn't be reevaluating every week. Because if you're just going to reevaluate every 12 months, you might be reevaluating every week, and that just gets kind of tedious when it shouldn't be necessary. They're asking us for extra money that only the state is providing to them that we can't even match. And primarily it's for, like you just said, which I thought was for paying people, because that's mostly what costs every organization is paying people. So we just have to make sure that they're being, paid properly. But anyway, I think that was the main point of bringing it up today, was to see but I guess we got part of the answer, because we're saying we're going to reevaluate as they come up.
right.
But
in a more diligent manner. So asking for
much better.
more.
And
Yes.
you are more diligent, which is wonderful. Okay.
Madam Chairman, this is Stephanie Rollinson. I'm one of the new commissioners. If there's any way that we could, when we ask a question or come on here, that we could say who it is speaking, because it's very confusing for those of us that are new and don't know who's talking.
Yes, especially without the video up. That was Barry Malthus,
Okay.
Commission member.
Okay.
From
Thank
Beaufort.
y'all. I appreciate that. I was just
Sorry, I'm the
confused.
1st District Commission member, Barry Malthus. Sorry.
Okay. Thank you.
I didn't realize that. I didn't realize that. I'm sorry, I didn't realize the new ones were going to be on here today, because they aren't technically part of the Finance Committee. So I didn't know that we were, but now that I realize we are, I'll start doing that.
Well, every opportunity is a training opportunity, Barry.
Okay.
So the more you hear, the more you ask, the more you know.
So Chris, so how do we pay these outliers when we don't have any money, really, to do that?
Well, it's part of the revenue problem we keep telling y'all about is that we are throwing 100% money at a problem that if properly structured with HHS would only be a 30 cents on the dollar problem. So the only way we can do it is, do you have any cash reserves? Do you have any savings anywhere that you can take out of your budget and toss on this? Do you have a comment?
It's a zero-sum game. We are, I feel confident that we get done this year. We've bent the negative curve to the positive, but we're still a click above positive cash flow for the end of the year. So if we use 4.2 last year, we'll use 4.2 this year. And the only way we can enlarge that pot is if we generate more revenue. And I would suggest that as we generate more revenue, we have to revisit this to enrich this until we can get to a system that brings it all into one bucket to get matched. But it is a zero-sum game, and I think that's the hard part to accept, but it's the reality of the situation we have.
Can I just, this is Ed Miller.
Oh, I'm sorry,
One of the new
I
commissioners.
missed it.
One of the areas that I've always had is the auditors. Auditors gives us the leverage of changing a system, whether it's local auditors or state auditors, because they kind of tell us, you can hold up for a second, you don't kill it, but I need to take a look at Williamsburg County. I need to audit them a little closer, or I need to audit Greenville County. Because what it does, it takes the pressure off of us, because we have to, at the end of the day, CFO auditors, you follow what I'm saying? They actually tell us, hold up for a second. We need to take a closer look at that, because what that does is, I don't care where you are, when you hear the word audit, now we're not talking about a forensic audit, because they're just real serious. But if I'm in King Street and I hear the word audit, trust me, if I was sleeping, I will wake up.
Yeah.
So maybe we need to,
I think we get their attention when we do that fiscal, when we do it's an audit, it's whatever, it's a total review of operational dollars. It's a little more practical than just coming up with an audit report, but you can put the word audit on it. You can put it up fiscal review. When we come in and say, we're going to look under the drapes, we're looking for all savings and where you're spending money, we've gotten their attention. And then you get the board also engaged. I think that is something that was not done in the past. So we have found great success we've had boards that were teetering on insolvency. If they weren't already there, that have flipped over to operating much better through that process. And then you have to maintain and make sure you're helping them along. But that seems to be a really good process. We keep fine tuning it, but being open with the executive director, their financial staff, as well as their board of directors has really gotten their attention.
but a letter right now from the auditor to us. Hey, fellas, we need to take a look at, these are some subject areas
Right.
that you just referenced, right? And the auditor is saying to us, let the outliers know that this is an area that has now hit the radar at another level. That's all I'm saying, because he can write us anytime he wants to. And say, hey, listen, I'm looking at your financial situation, and here are some things that I see that maybe we need to take a closer look at. And it doesn't stay here, because it does no good when those, how many different,
39.
39, because whatever comes here it goes out to the 39 because it's not coming from us. We have to manage money. We have to manage it properly. Otherwise, we'll be facing a forensic audit, and that's not good.
And this is Gary Lamel. Ed, the one thing I'm putting this from a historical perspective. There has been, rightly or wrongly, throughout the years between the state agency and the local boards and other providers, a lot of concerns that that particular audit concept, was being done for punitive reasons. So-and-so would say something that state office didn't like, and the next thing they knew, they were being audited up and down. Kevin, I'm sure, who's there in the room, who is the head of the audit division, could probably tell you more stories about that than I know about even. So I think one of the things, just to sort of put it in perspective, historically, audits have been a dicey issue for the agency. Would those who are there from staff agree that has been a sort of a hot topic? So I think that's one thing that when the staff is approaching it, just so you know, one of the limitations that we're dealing with, that historical thing, to make sure that people don't think that what we're doing is being done for some sort of punitive or aggressive. Is that making sense to you guys?
It makes all the sense in the world. The only thing we're doing is calling the room to attention. That's all I'm saying. Right. You don't necessarily have to carry out anything, but if you don't have the attention of folks, then you're just wasting your breath. That's all I'm saying.
Yeah.
And the letter is coming from me to the board. I mean, it's not coming from staff, it's coming from me.
Right. Mm-hmm. And that's just, I just wanted to, for the new folks, I just wanted to give a little bit of perspective of some of the issues that we've had in the past. That was essentially it.
Okay.
And this is Kevin Jacoby, Director.
You're not near a microphone. You're going to have to
Calm down.
come on down.
Can you hear me, Stephanie?
Get a little closer. How about that?
Well,
I can't hear you. I can hear you.
Maintain my 6-foot social. One thing we can do is audit, because again, management owns this, but like Pat and I have been talking about, moving audit looking inward. And I think what we can all agree sitting on this room is this is a problem. So this would be one of those issues that we can put, we're talking about enterprise risk management, that we place on our list. And then we start following up with management and saying, okay, this is, we'll get some measurable criteria, like at such and such a time, you had this much in outliers, whatever it is, $4 million. 6 months from now, where are you? Have you dropped it? Is this review process really working? Your more in-depth analysis, and then we'll look at it 6 months later, and we can report back to y'all and say, hey, they have implemented processes, it's working. Hopefully one thing that hadn't been mentioned here, we are talking about, nursing is covered by us, but what I would like to see when you're doing some of your reviews is, fingers crossed, we have put some more emphasis on a behavior support plans. Mm-hmm. And so as we emphasize that, maybe there was somebody out there who did need a one-on-one, but because the behavior support plan was implemented and has been worked on, now they can drop back and now they don't need a one-on-one. They can just work with regular staff. And so that frees up some outlier money,
Because the total dollars might not change, but it moves to somebody else who's waiting in line, who does not have any money because we have nothing left to give them. Right. So we want to see if we can get an outcome. If you have a positive outcome for an individual, you should notice that, and the outlier dollar should come down a bit. Right. Now, I do understand that the argument's going to be, but if we take away these supports, the person's going to fall off the wagon and we're going to start all over again. But still, coming back a little bit. Analyze what the cost is. Even if we come down a few $1,000s, it's still coming down in the right direction.
Right. And we can also track that, same thing you're saying is, so we can track total dollars. And like I was saying, let's just say theoretically for our discussion, somebody has a BSP, it's working, we are able to pull some of that money back in. Somebody comes off the waiting list, high management, they're at another provider. We might see some of that roll out, but it's going to a different provider. So we'll be able to track that too.
That's right.
We can see, which providers have how much outlier money, and then when we look at it 6 months later, we can say, okay, well, it's gone down 10%, but the reallocation has changed by 50%, for example.
Yeah, I was just going to say, this is Chris Clark. I was just going to say that Mr. Miller's point, I think, was more at the enterprise level, not at the provider level when he was making the comments he was making.
I agree.
And his message is to have an independent review, I think, of the whole process and where those funds have been historically. And so I think that's spot on, Kevin. But he was
And for historical,
kind of vocalizing.
That's what he's talking
That's right.
about, is
Right.
starting at the bottom, because we have to, and that's the trigger. That's always the trigger. We always have to come back to the auditors. We're not trying to put anybody in jail. That's not the objective here. We just trying to bring the management where we can control it and we don't have to kill Mary in that process.
well, one of the things that we have discovered over the course of this discovery journey, this is Mary, that we have gone from over the last year and a half of discovering where our holes are, that we have discovered that we have not utilized our manpower in the best way. So that Kevin and his team they've been auditing outwardly the provider network, when we realize we've got huge holes here that would benefit from his expertise to turn that light into our risks and our problems. And also, as we develop new systems or come up with trying to figure out what number is correct and what number isn't correct, to have him pressure test those things as a person who reports to the commission. So that was, and I've always, it's internal audit. We need to start doing some internal auditing, and that has been valuable. And I believe that as we give the next audit, what is that called? The audit plan for next year, that's what you're going to see is more of an inward focus. We're going to focus on a few other things to get outwardly review of providers. It's not that we don't care about consumer funds. We desperately do. It's just how do we focus our energies and do it in a more efficient manner where we can actually look at more, because we visit more programs in a different way than to have Kevin's team go out there and hit 6 providers in a year when we can do more. So.
Okay, but and so I think that, this is Ed Miller, I think that what is appropriate is that we need a letter from you. Hey, fellas, this is where we are, as we see it from where we are. And then that goes out to everybody. You follow what I'm saying? It's not complete, because what I'm hearing, and with my ear on the ground across the way, you all are spot on, because that's the big question. And you right on it. There's no question about it. You right where we need to be at. And a whole lot of folks would be pleased, because you got to remember now, when you look at the governor's office or the House or the Senate, they are always looking to say, where are we lean at? And where are we wasting at? So our job is trying to become more lean. And the pressure point starts with you. A letter tomorrow puts us on notice, everybody, including commissioners, that this, I've taken a look over the past, whatever it was, and here's what I see, and here's some of my recommendations as to, and then I would solicit you all, Mary, I solicit you now to reach out to all of those providers and get their input, okay? Because it's coming, the trigger is here between these two, because they're working together and here. And it takes the pressure off of Mary, because she doesn't look like the big bad, whatever we want to call it. Because the rest of us can take it.
Blonde right now. Yeah. Yeah, I mean,
I give back the balance of my time.
we have definitely been working on this problem for a while and examining it for a while. And, yeah, okay.
Anybody else have any comments or questions before we move on? from this, I would say that you will keep us informed on the next
I mean, we can have, I mean,
names and
the deep dive into this was done by Chris's team, and any historical data that I have in my head from doing Outliers for 100 years.
And Pat,
And if, if you want it tested by Kevin, that's fine.
And it's not so much tested. Chris has told us,
Yeah, this is it. This is what we've come
and
up
he
with.
hands it to
Kevin.
And Kevin come back and say, hey, because he's the auditor, that's at all levels, to where the money stops to. And we have to take a serious look. I may not listen too much to Chris over here.
Well, I should hope
But I
you
got-
would.
I got 200,000 years over here.
Yeah. Well, I can tell you, we have already, this is Kevin Yacobi.
Yeah, we've already done it.
So I've already put on my list, because Pat and I were talking about our ERM, Enterprise Risk Management list this week. So this is already going on there. And what we'll do is I'll get baseline from you, Chris, some data. And then, like I said, we'll just add it and we'll start doing a quarterly, some type of systemic review. And okay, since last time we met, how many outliers have you looked at? What were your findings on them? Did you reduce them? How many new outliers? And we can track all that. It's measurable data. We can track it and let you know.
And I'm not talking about exclusive, I'm talking about inclusive. Because the people out there that's doing the actual work, they have to feel encouraged. They don't want to feel threatened, as who's the commissioner was on the phone?
Gary or Barry or Stephanie.
One of them, whichever one, or three. You follow what I'm saying? We have to make them feel as though we're not out to get you. That's not the intent here.
Exactly.
I will say, this is Stephanie. I will say, coming from, a local board, those local boards are struggling. I sat on one, I saw what was happening, and they're having a hard time adjusting to the billable hour thing. And I think there's a lag in money coming back from Medicaid, Medicare, or whatever, and there's that lag of money. And they are financially strapped, and it's not, and as I looked at at the books, it's not a problem with the local boards as much as it is getting their reimbursements. And that becomes a problem for these guys. And so when we look at them, these, like I said, these people are volunteers like we are. They're sitting on these boards and trying to fix these problems. And I think they could benefit from a kind person, the kindness of an auditor or someone coming in and saying, okay, here's a model that works. Let's try to make these adjustments and see if it'll help you get your reimbursement sooner, if it'll help those billable hours, and getting that system up and running, because they're struggling. I talked to auditors, I talked to the caseworkers, and they're having a hard time adjusting to it. So just be aware of that from my perspective and what I've seen coming from a local board.
Most definitely, it is a change in the way of doing business, that's for sure.
Yeah, we're not coming in as gangbusters. Coming in to help.
Okay,
Asking-
all
We
right.
need to move on to the next item,
Yes,
don't
we
we?
do.
What are we gonna say, Robin? You wanna say we're gonna revisit this in 3 months and see where we are?
Yeah, I think that's
6 months or something?
Yeah, you can put it on the agenda. Do you want it on the finance committee agenda? Do you just want it on the large commission? How do you want to
In
do
3
this?
months.
Yeah,
This,
committee? Okay, you got it.
all right. So,
I didn't hear you, Robin, I'm sorry, what'd you say?
Mary's gonna put, this topic back on our committee agenda in 3 months.
Okay, good.
Okay. So moving on, the next item on the agenda is state-owned facilities, the transition options, and Chris is gonna lead us in that discussion.
Right, so what happened is, we were working on this project prior to the COVID situation hitting, and I do see that the policy committee is getting ready to take this up. So I figured the finance committee probably needs to be parallel and be discussing this situation, just so you guys are up to speed as well in regards to that. So for those that are new, we have 10% of our facilities that are operated by our providers. We own them. We pay for all the maintenance, the licenses, the insurance, repairs, inspections, termite bonds, you name it. That means 90% of those homes are owned by the providers, and they pay all those expenses. And so there's an inherent fairness and equity issue related to the folks that own these 10% homes. And the bands that we generate, the bands are geared towards sustaining these facilities, plus room and board, which they charge to the consumers that reside in these homes. That's where the funding is to come from. So we are basically subsidizing these 10% of the homes. There's 60 properties that we're doing this. We're spending about $220,000 a year paying for things for these facilities, including insurance. We pay all the property insurance, like I said, repairs and maintenance and so forth. We paid out $150,000 in fiscal year 19 for these 60 homes, and $70,000 for insurance and inspections and licenses and things like that. So the issue is, we were moving down a path of, which body was it that told us to get
It was in the
DDSN oversight report?
Yeah.
It says the agency should treat all providers as contractors for whom they are purchasing services, rather than extensions of DDSN that have to be managed to ensure the success of the provider. Treating all providers equally in terms of resources and other assistance may entice more private providers to enter the marketplace in South Carolina. In this environment, providers could compete for clients, and better managed entities would have an advantage in recruiting clients and generating a profit. This could allow the agency to concentrate on ensuring that the purchased services are being provided adequately in a manner required by the commission policies. So that's straight out of that report. It also says that we should get out of any tenant landlord type relationships with our providers. And so that is the primary motivator, is to fall in line with the external parties that came in and reviewed us and wrote these reports. And so we were moving down that path. So there's a new approach that Barry brought to the table, and I'll let him speak if he wants to, but in a nutshell, we were looking at trying to get these properties deeded over. We've already met with the Department of Administration. We've got all the support from all the state folks to do this. It's just a matter of making it happen and considering whether there should be any type of funding provided, because a lot of these facilities, not a lot, but a good portion of them have deferred maintenance issues because the state has been in charge of managing the repairs and maintenance and hasn't done the greatest job of doing so. And some of the providers have expressed that, and they're, kind of reluctant to just take these without any assistance. And, my argument to that is that those boards have received the same funding that anybody else has received. And actually, we've been subsidizing it all these years. And so that's a non-starter with me, basically, but that's a commission decision. So anyways, what Barry has brought to the table is really, instead of getting tied up in all the deeding process, which we do need to do, and it's going to take a lot of time to do that, is let's just change our directive that outlines who pays for what. And so Barry, I don't know, I'm kind of putting you on the spot, but you guys are taking that up in the committee, and basically if that's passed, we will quit paying for the vast majority of these expenses for these 60 properties.
That's correct. It would be, what we did was reverse the entire policy so that all of the expenses that are currently being paid by 90% of the people will also be paid by those 10%. So everybody's paying about the same, but at some point we're going to have another policy to clarify some things, because I'm sure there's some things that aren't in that directive. But the point is, at the June policy committee meeting, we are taking up the possibility of, because it's already been out in public comment, that's already over and all that. So we are making changes. It's a matter of what change is made, but it looks like that change will be made to where we will no longer be paying expenses as of the next June commission meeting. All those expenses will be reversed, and we will no longer be paying that through the commission. It'll be everybody, they'll be paying it through their band payment, which is what they should have been paying all along for the last 25, 30 years. So, so we're not subsidizing anybody else anymore. We're not subsidizing the 10% more than the 90% anymore. And then we may end up with another policy at some point, 6 months, a year down the road, and that'll encompass what we have in that policy and whatever else we want to put in there, like moving because we would like to see all the houses moved out of our name, but that's going to take so much time that we want it. And I also wanted to get the providers to realize this is how we're going to be playing the game from now on. So therefore, do you want the house or do you not? So that we can decide if somebody else does or we need to sell it or whatever. But the main point is we're getting the inequity out of the system, and everybody's being treated equally.
And another point to that, Barry, is there are 6 administrative/day facilities. And so when we flip to fee for service, when everybody gets their rate passed through, you're going to have 6 providers running day program where they don't have very little facility costs in a lot of ways that other providers do. So again, there's an inherent fairness issue there where, wait a minute, so I'm running day program and you're giving me the same rate as this other person, but they don't have to pay all the same expenses I do. And so that's another aspect of that decision as well. But Robin, the only reason I put this on here was just to keep y'all apprised of it. And I didn't know if the finance committee had any input. I don't know how the committees work together. I don't know how y'all exchange information, but we took this up several months ago.
Yeah, I have the list right here of all the 60 places.
Okay, so I just wanted to bring it before you and make sure that you didn't have any.
Yeah, no, I appreciate you bringing it up because we haven't talked about it in a while, and I like the solution that Barry has outlined, making it a policy, changing the policy on it, and that saves us money, correct? So
Might be used for outliers.
right. So put it somewhere else.
We have, that is the direction that they're moving that policy.
And just so everybody in the room knows and folks online, there's a lot of fiscal pressure on providers right now. I mean, if you look at the case management EI thing we did, and then you look at what's going on right now with day program closures and us flipping the bands and all, there's a lot of negative financial pressure on the providers. So it's going to be very key that when we flip these bands that we do it right.
That's right.
And that we make sure that we don't pull cash out of the system that's desperately needed by these providers just to make ends meet. So I just want y'all to realize that, because if you start adding up all the things that are going on right now and the folks that are new don't know all those things, there is a lot of negative fiscal pressure. Plus we're seeing prior to COVID hitting, now right now we're seeing utilization drop. So we've got a lot of at-home services where boards will be saving a lot of money per se because utilization's down. But prior to that, utilization was climbing.
It's climbing, exactly.
And so we need to, when we bring the Band BI flip to you, just recognize that all these things that are adding up so that we are mindful of them during that process.
Which makes the rate setting and the residential portion of it that much more important.
And day program.
And day program, yep.
Yep.
Because that needs to be looked at. So everything's got to be done with a lot of caution. And I know that the case management EI change was a huge change. And I understand because I've worked out in the board world all of my career, except for a couple of years here. The issue, and that was a long time in coming. So that was 6 years of it's coming. And then what we have to get folks to do as we're moving down these paths, we have to make sure that every decision we make is well telegraphed and well thought through. We're doing individual analysis of each provider to make sure that these bans hit people in a different way, because it really depends on where you are, how much you're serving in each band that is going to affect your cash flow on the other side. Some people lose money in those bands, some people make money in those bands, and it's kind of all the luck of the draw. You know, who do you have and what needs do they have and how many bands do you actually are financial manager over? So this is not a small process. So I do want to make sure that everybody understands we are not doing this in a way that is not thoughtful at all. I mean, we do not operate if we don't have providers to take care of the individuals we support. But on the other hand, when we are paying for a service, we need to make sure the quality of that service is where it needs to be. And the outcomes for the individuals, that there are outcomes for the individuals, and that the status quo is not accepted. So we need to be helping people move through their lives in a more productive and useful manner. Okay, that's my.
So that was for information.
Okay.
If there's no other discussion, then
Yeah. Just, it won't really be a finance issue after its policies change.
not unless y'all have some kind of comment to make as far as,
I don't.
Probably not until we actually get to transferring property. Then it's probably going to come back here at that point. Okay.
All right, so we'll move on to the next item, discussion of
yeah.
B&I project.
That's a natural segue because we kind of brought it up in the last topic. So we've got a multi-functional team that's interfunctional team that's been pulled together. There's, how many of us are there? Like 15 or it's probably about 15 of us, I guess, from all kinds of different pieces of our organization, working on the band B&I. We've got a nice project, use a Microsoft project. We've got a nice project with Gantt charts and everything built out. Thank you, Ben Orner, if you're listening. So we can really see kind of how long it's going to take to do this correctly. And after looking at it and thinking about the providers and making sure they're ready and that we're stacking the deck for success and not failure, we want to recommend that we, and we'll have to take this to the commission, of course, that we go for a target of October 1. We think that will set us up for much more success than July 1st. Again, if we march towards that, as I've told everybody on this call, on our team, we're still going to act like the deadline's July, because we can't just use up 90 days slowing down and going, okay, well, now we don't have to be in a hurry. No, we're still in a hurry, because the purpose of delaying it is to communicate to the providers adequately and set up all the processes and make sure we communicate it, versus it being rushed, half-baked, half-communicated. And so we're going to recommend that we shoot for an October 1 date. And I don't know if y'all have any questions, and I know, Barry, you were pretty vocal about this on the commission, so I don't know if you have questions for me as to why we've selected the October 1st, or what you might want to say here.
I always have something to say, sorry. I think October 1 is good. I just wanted to get an idea as to, I mean, many of the commission members don't want to spend too much FMAP money supplementing people that are not providing services. So my question is, how many? 3 months is not bad, because I was thinking it would be longer. So I'm thankful it's October 1st. But I assume that about how much money of FMAP money would be used during that time to supplement the providers.
So what we're going to do, Barry, is we're going to have to do something similar to what we did just here last month in regards to monitoring day attendance and adjusting things. So we're working through various scenarios on how we can go about ensuring that we're made whole. And Pat, I don't know if you want to speak to like the 50% retention and things of that nature that and people are starting to come back in day programs and keeping an eye on providers that are actually making an effort to reopen and.
You know, when we get to July 1st, which we'll fully implement the transition plan that you approved at the last commission meeting about walking down the day program, we will not use any more FMAP after July 1st to supplement day programs that are not attending. Basically, at that time, there's an expectation that, you know, some day programs starting to get going. I think it's a very challenging environment. We don't know how many more will get going. There's a lot of creative thought about how to do it, but we are not going to pay for services not rendered on July 1st. Now, when we start next year, we have that first quarter is going to be in a band system. And that band system for the at-home consumers, it's not 100% solidified, but under whatever fine tune we do, there's going to be an expectation that the at-home day consumers, for example, that were getting services last February, those group of we've left money in the bands for them to have replacement services. We're just not sure how those replacement services are being utilized, whether it could go up, it could go down. But when we get to the close of the first quarter, we're going to have a very similar settlement situation that we did before, which is basically we're going to look at utilization and make sure that whatever we left in the bands was equivalent to that utilization, so that there's no penalty for the boards servicing those people during the first quarter, or no windfall profit from having the boards too rich compared to utilization. So there will be some settlement process for that first quarter for the day program utilization, because it's so uncertain.
We want to incentivize those providers that are trying to reopen and provide services. So whatever model we come up with, you know, if you've got a provider out there that's being very creative, doing all they can to provide services, we don't want to stick them with funding like everybody else out there that maybe isn't making that same kind of effort and being successful. So whatever we.
There you go. Say that again.
Yeah, we want to land on a solution where we tie economic gains to success in delivery of services.
Anyway, it sounds good. We can move on.
Okay. So that's where we are on the B&I project. If anybody else on the line.
Except one of the questions I wanted to ask, I'm sorry, Barry's one more question, and I promise I'll end it. So the B's and I's, that is the only bands that we have that are outside of residential services. Is that correct? So at the point of October, all of the band B's and I's is the only bands that will be. Those are the ones we're flipping, but that's the only ones that affect any day program outside of residential. Is that correct?
Correct. As far as our current band system, we have some bands that we utilize internal that aren't external bands, if you will, that are at-home bands, like the old Band A, for example. We still use it in-house to run reports and keep up with funding and stuff like that. Those have already flipped fee for service. So there are other bands per se, but outwardly in regards to our actual capitated contract, yes, it's only those two bands.
Okay. All right, I got it. Thank you.
Does anybody else have any other questions before we move on? Okay. So the next item, day program transition plan finalization.
So that was a horrible title. Basically, what I wanted to let everybody know is that the plan y'all adopted at the last commission meeting, that Debbie's implemented it, and we've written a memo and funds have started coming out of their payment schedules, and just letting you know that it's done. And so just giving you that update, really.
For the new commissioners, do you want to speak to just a little bit more about what it was that we approved?
Pat, you can can you do a quick, you're a real good quick summary person.
On March
They're sitting
16th,
here.
when the day programs effectively closed because of the governor's executive order, you know, it was devastating where they went from 100% occupancy to 0 overnight. And because of the way we pay the prospective bands, they had the money. And so while we're going through that
So, yeah,
crisis,
they got the money regardless.
they got the money regardless. So
The
while we're going through this
payment,
crisis
the
period
services wasn't being
of
rendered.
stabilizing people and figuring out how we're going to do things, we decided, we thought it was a fair thing to do, particularly with the CMS's FMAP money to back us up. It gave us a cushion to to make decisions like this. We said from March 16th to April 30th, the day program services that they normally would have rendered, that they did not render, that we let them keep that band money. And then from May 1st to June 30th, the next 2 months, we had, we look at that very little sliver of people in the at-home program that were getting day services. And we took the amount of day services they were normally billing, and we reduced that by half. And that we left half with the bands, and then the boards had to pay the other half back to us. And we contributed to that as well, so that their reduction was 50% of the normal at-home band. And we left them 50% because these same consumers could get replacement services. Even though their services went from literally 0 overnight, they still could get respite, PCA, and other services in the community to make up for them, although they're difficult in this COVID world, they're hard to get. And so we left that we felt that was more than adequate to cover those services. And looking at April's utilization, it gives me belief that utilization has dropped in the at-home market. So that way we kind of split the revenue losses for May 1st to June 30th using FMAP money. And then on July 1st, they're in a position to where they have to adjust their operations to match the new world. But I do want to add one more thing is Mary's working with the Appendix K. We're trying to get an enhanced day program rate of 37% to account for the lower ratios that these day programs are going to have in order to be COVID-19 compliant. And so hopefully that would incentivize them and support them to start operations, because then their rate would go from, give me a number here, Chris, low 50s to
What are we talking about?
day program rate with the
Well,
increase.
it's almost $90.
We asked for this.
Full day, for a full day.
Right, and I mean, this is something we requested, we don't have it yet. But as far as with the day program, knowing that because of the distance you have to keep, van routes are going to change. So we looked at, and taking into account some difficulty of care people, which we don't usually do. We don't think of them differently. So we were looking at what a normal ratio is, what a difficulty of care ratio would be of like 1 to 2 versus what a normal ratio would be between 1 to 7. And then I looked at what the real ratio is. The 1 to 7 is the ratio in our regulations. But when we look at day programs across the state, the ratio is more like 1 to 5 because of people's needs. So looking at the real ratio versus the regulatory ratio. And then we said, let's figure out a rate on 1 to 3.5. And we came up with that, and it came up with to
37% increase.
37% increase on the rate. Now, that's a temporary rate increase because of COVID. And we asked for that in the Appendix K, like we said we would, because we know there's an increase in the need for PPEs, because now you got to wipe down all the vans and do all that kind of stuff. And then we also asked for PPEs to be added to individuals' budgets so that people at home, because we were just kind of like, people don't have face masks at home. I mean, you don't just have them, and people don't keep surgical masks in their house. So we said that should be part of their budget for durable medical equipment. So that's what, asked for that.
And retainer payments for those not in the capitated
Right.
system.
We have providers like our QPLs that provide day services that are not in the capitated system. We ask for a retainer payment, and actually it's just a reiteration of the first go round of the first K. When we sent over the retainer payment for those folks, we just added it again to this one.
So how does that 37.5 look, percentage?
What do you mean, what does it look?
That is the
That
percentage,
is the
so.
percentage.
No, but I'm saying how, at the end of the day, have we, so far what we have measured, does that fit the bill?
I believe it does fit the bill. The problem is, it has to go over to HHS because it's their Appendix K. We're just making our recommendations based on the fact that we're the subject matter experts,
Okay,
okay?
no, that's.
And we did. So we haven't heard, but we also haven't had it thrown back in our faces. They're just looking at a couple of words. And so they have not been negative. It has not been received in a negative manner, which is good.
Okay. All right, if there's no questions, we'll move on. Okay. All right, so the next item, access and mobility for the All Pilot Program grant.
Yeah, I can blame Robin for this. Robin was contacted by Fred Payne in Carolina's Alliance for Innovation group up in Greenville. Fred is the most persistent,
Former county.
focused guy I've ever met.
Former county council member for Greenville County.
He is very, very persistent in regards to this. And he is entirely committed. I don't know how many hours the man works a week, or volunteers, I guess.
Yeah, he doesn't get paid for this.
So anyways, Fred Payne with his group is working on trying to bring to bear a solution that allows us to, as a state, starting off regionally, leverage all of our vehicles and our drivers so that we can meet all the transportation needs of folks that don't have access to transportation. So under-transported people, like our disabled population that don't have vehicles to go to work on nights and weekends. We're not allowed to provide transportation to our consumers for free. They have to pay for it for jobs if they get a competitive job like at Burger King or Bilo or whatever. So only during a certain initial period, like 60 days or something, we can transport them, but after that, they're on their own.
Unless they're in a residential program.
Yeah, right.
Residence provides that.
So it's a real barrier to employment, and you know, we have folks that live at home that aren't in our residences that have needs. They need to get to church, they want to go shopping, they want to go visit people, whatever, and maybe there's not an RTA there, or the RTA doesn't operate and isn't accessible. So anyways, Fred has pulled together a bunch of entities. I mean, it's amazing the people he's got involved in this thing, but he's succeeded in obtaining this Access and Mobility for All pilot program grant. It's $400,000 almost. It's a FTA, or Federal Transit Authority grant. They had to have a state agency as a subrecipient, so we will be the subrecipient. And what that means is we're going to get the money here at DDSN, and we're going to manage it from an accounting perspective. So we will do all the paying the bills, making the deposits, doing any financial reports, what have you. That is an in-kind contribution that we're making to the program. I valued it at around $22,000 for the 1 year period. And there's a lot of other folks putting cash and in-kind into this. And so we are going to be starting this program fairly soon. It's going to focus on the Fountain Inn, Greenville, Lawrence area. And so the Lawrence County DSN Board and Thrive Upstate are partners in this. So is DDSN, because we have Witten Center in that area. We're going to try to identify vehicle assets and coordinate vehicle delivery. And so what the neatest part of this is they have an external party that brings to the table software solutions. Actually, there's multiple software partners, but anyways, it does dynamic on-demand rerouting based on, you know, I'm a person needing transportation, go on my phone or internet, or I think they can even call in, and they coordinate a ride, and they come by and pick them up, and there's this dynamic, they're constantly rerouting vehicles based on who's closest. And so they're going to build out this web of vehicles. They're going to pay let's say, for example, with Lawrence, they did a study for them and they identified that they're 30% inefficient in their routing. They could reduce like 11 vehicles out of their current routing structure. And they're doing the same similar thing with Thrive Upstate. And so what they're doing is they're bringing to bear efficiencies in their routing capabilities and identifying assets that aren't leveraged, maximum leverage. And so it's a really cool thing. You know, there are going to be global positioning systems in these vehicles. They're going to pay Lawrence and Thrive Upstate and potentially us to lease our vehicles. So it's actually a revenue stream for the provider. Provider's going to make money on this because a lot of the providers have paid for vehicles, even if they're not paid for. We're also working with DOT to knock down barriers with them, because with Department of Transportation, if you get a 5310 grant, it's for elderly and disabled transportation only. So if you have somebody that's jumping on that vehicle and they need to go to BMW, because we're going to have folks that need to get to work also that aren't disabled, elderly that need to go to the hospital or go to a doctor's appointment. So it's focused on folks with disabilities, but it's considering anyone that needs transportation. So it's really, really neat. As we start opening this program, I'll share more with you. If you're interested in seeing the grant document that Jeff Duncan, who's the representative in that area, has told Fred. We haven't gotten official notification, but he's kind of told Fred, look, you're getting the money. So we're real excited, and I think it's going to be really good for the state, because this is going to be a pilot project that they want to roll out statewide. There's 3 or 4 other grants that they've asked for, and all of them are looking very favorable because of, I mean, Fred's just
I think it's wonderful.
amazing.
I also want to know that routing efficiency software, I think other people can use that. If you found all that efficiency in one board, can we imagine if we can use it for other boards?
Yeah, the problems that we have in this state, public transportation.
It is the almost the number one cause of failure to keep a job for our people. I think it is. And then
For the citizens of South Carolina,
yep,
it's huge. So,
great job, folks. Thank you.
thanks for that update. Glad that.
Well, thank you for the contact.
I can tell. I don't know if you're sincere about that.
I
But
kind of, under my breath periodically, I'm like, Robin.
I do have some suggestions for a second pilot.
Oh, you do? Okay.
Maybe in the Williamsburg County area? Do you know Faye Dozier?
Hayesville, Bill.
Let everybody say amen.
You know Faye Dozier over there? You know her?
Amen.
Yeah.
All right, okay.
Okay, next item, Chief Financial Officer report. Chris?
All right, so this is just a catch-all. I'll just hit these really quickly. We are working on the 2021 contracts and commission packet. Thanks to Debbie Wilson and Deborah Leopard for working on that. So when you get to the commission meeting, we'll have all that information, even in advance, you know, that you're used to getting. It's like 70 pages of contract information. So we're working on that. From a preventive or proactive standpoint, we have begun discussing if we do get a budget cut, what are we going to do about it? So publicly, if you go out on the Department of Admin, we are required as part of our budget submission to the state on an annual basis to tell them how we would absorb a 3% budget cut. And that's a mandatory filing that we have to do. So we've turned that in back in, I don't know, June, July, August timeframe for last year. And it's like $9 million that we had to come up with. And that's public information. It's out on the website. I can send you a copy of it if you want to see it. But we want to go ahead and start discussing internally so that we're not caught flat-footed if there is a budget cut. So just want you to know that we're working on that proactively. We're working on settlements. Just to give you a little bit of an update. Family support funds look like there's about $930,000 that we need to recover from the provider network, and that's over a 4-year period. We're hoping we're going to be able to start doing that here soon, and of course we'll have to work with providers to make sure that doesn't cause a cash flow problem for them. We'll probably wait till we transition years, get through where they get their 3 checks in July, and make sure we give them adequate notice so that if they think this is going to cause any problems for them, we're aware of it. Care and maintenance, we're pretty much done with it too. It looks like it's about $105,000 net that we're owed. Care and maintenance is charged for folks that live in an intermediate care facility, and we settle with that. It's a two-way settlement. If a provider collects more care and maintenance than was estimated in their contract, then they owe us money, and vice versa. And so we owe some providers some money, and some providers owe us money, and it nets to $105,000 for that same period of time as the 2016 to 19. Debbie's helping me with state-funded follow-along and state-funded community support settlements. We had to kind of pause that because we lost Casey Sternenberg, our cost analysis director, and then our other cost analysis lady is working from home, and it's kind of affected our ability to get to the bottom of what we need to get to the bottom of, but that's right behind those, and hopefully let's get those costs settled here soon. Cost reports, the more I look at them as I try and finalize ours, we're in desperate need of training of our providers in regards to cost reports. It's another example of we expect providers and auditors to do a job, but nobody bothers communicating with them how to do it or what's expected. So there's only been one cost report training done by this agency in 30 years that I'm aware of. And it was like a 1-hour session provided by a guy that hates training. And he was like nervous the whole time. So it wasn't a very good training, and he'll admit to it. So we've really got to step up. Not only are there issues with cost reports now, but there's a lot of new issues related to PPP and how that's accounted for, as well as GASB 45 and 68 liabilities that are also an issue for cost reporting. So we're going to be working on that. We're going to have to do that between now and end of July, early August. And then the final thing, we've started training our auditors now, having them come in to audit training. That video is out on our website if you want to look at it. But what's really exciting is, again, give Debbie credit to this. We're trying to develop an auditor resource toolkit, if you will, on our website. And so we've come up with a bunch of resources. Basically, a lot of them were already on the website, but they're scattered all over the place, and you have to know where to go get them. Some things are behind a secure login. Some things are only available in emails, like Kevin Jacoby's CPA findings and internal audit findings that he sends out. You send them to just boards, right? Not auditors, right? They don't go to audit firms.
It goes to providers,
Right.
private and boards, and
Right.
with the cover memo saying, please share this with your external
Right.
auditor. Now, whether that gets it. We also ask it to share with the board chair, so I don't know if that
Right.
gets shared as well.
So we're really close. I think next week you'll see this pop up on our website. And so it's very, very exhaustive. It's awesome. I'm very proud of it. What it's going to do is allow us to point our finance directors and our auditors to one place where they can get everything they need, one-stop shop. And so just giving you an update on that as well. So we're making a lot of progress in a lot of areas, but
Can I
we're about
say-
5%.
Can I say
Down our
one
journey.
thing? Chris's focus on training is so important, but it is part of the agency's focus on training. So every area we find, there's just been a lack of training for our providers, and we want folks, we know people want to do the right thing. I don't believe in my heart that people go out there every day to do the wrong thing. So we just want to make sure they have the tools to do that. So, that includes, because we always think of programmatic areas, but finance is a huge piece of this puzzle that has to be up to speed. I think cost reports would be so much easier to do if everybody was reporting their audits in the same manner. If we got the reports in the same manner, then it would be a matter of plug and play versus trying to pull out numbers from larger numbers. So I think we're well on that track and moving down the road. We want to make it easier on providers as well as easier here, so the information is good.
That's my report.
All right, if no one has questions, we'll move on to the last item. Director of Internal Audit Report, Kevin.
Thank you very much. I'll only try to keep you a few minutes because I just have some informational. As we get ready to start our next fiscal year, I wanted to report on the external audit reports for this past year. For the new commissioners, we require all of our 39 boards have to have a financial audit and a report on applying agreed upon procedures. If you're a private provider and you provide residential services, you have to have a financial audit. And if you are any type of private provider and you have over $250,000 in DDSN funding, and there's a caveat here, you have to do a report on agreed upon procedures. The caveat is if you are a private early intervention provider, your revenue, your $250,000 revenue is DDSN revenue and BabyNet revenue from HHS. Then you have to have a report on applying agreed upon procedures. So with those criteria in place, last year we had the 39 boards, of course, that we needed both documents from, and we would have had 41 privates that fell into the category of we either needed a ROAP and or a financial audit from them. So that gave us a total. So we received 11 of those reports, one or the other. 11 of those were late. We're still waiting on 5. We still have 5 outstanding. But we don't mandate a fiscal year for our providers. So like one of those 5, don't ask me why. I find it personally humorous. Their fiscal year starts April 1st on April Fool's Day. So they have 90 days to get us their report on applying agreed upon procedures, which means we're getting that right as our fiscal year is ending. But of those 11 providers that have filed late, because we do have a contract reduction if we don't receive it on time, it's $100 a day and it caps out at $2,500. So contract reductions, $13,800 for this past year. We have recouped $13,200 of those dollars. The $600 variance is one that we just got in this week and we just sent notice to finance. So they'll be recouping that in their June or July payment. Really, was a very quick summary, but any questions?
So is it to my advantage to just not give the report, pay the fine?
That's a possibility.
You can't.
It's much cheaper to pay $2,500 than buy an audit. So we've talked about that, Kevin and I have, when we did the directive this year, right?
Right. Now, I will say, we do not have anybody that does not comply. We'll get it late. Like we have one, we know they're gonna be late. We know it's gonna be $2,500. They went into receivership. They got an investor. We're working with the investors, financial management company in Colorado. They're saying, we talked to them this week. We've seen drafts for both reports. We anticipate you'll have it within the next week or so. So we haven't had anybody, I think if they just flat out said, we're not gonna do it, we need to come back to y'all, because that needs to be more than $2,500, particularly if you're a residential provider and you're housing
Right.
Well,
consumers.
it's a potentially a contractual violation.
It's a contractual violation at that point. Then we need to say, do we really have a contract anymore because you're refusing?
Right. We haven't had anybody that just said
They
they're
don't
not going to comply. I do wish some of them could comply a little.
So is it a headache to modify that? Or is it not?
To modify the,
Fine?
The fine?
it is in the directive that we just issued. So it could be modified when we modify that directive. Like, for example, I'm assuming you're talking about maybe removing the cap or increasing the cap. Those directives transitioned this year from DDS and internal audit to DDS and finance. So that would be something when we review. Now, we've already approved the directive for fiscal year 20, and it's already gone out, and we already have auditors, some auditors starting some of their field work because we've gotten phone calls from them. But that's certainly something that we could modify. I will say, maybe this whole fiscal year with coronavirus and in years past, we have not had this type of this much non-compliance. I mean, typically we'll have a few, a couple of these are actually DDSN boards that we received late. I do have some issues with those, because like Chris's folks have to have their cost report to HHS.
120 days after year end,
Right, 120 days.
October 31st,
So some of
plus
these-
years for some apparently.
Right. Some of these we got so late, we didn't even have the financials to tie back to the cost report,
Right.
and that presents a problem. Now, this is the first year we have ever had 2 of our boards reply so late.
So it could just be the year that's, this type of year that's causing
Right.
more than normal.
Well, I mean, I know one of those 2, I mean, they're sort of both of them. One of those 2 had a new ED come in the middle of the year and had their long-term audit firm that had done the audit for years leave. So you had, you could sort of explain some of that there. The other
Special
one
circumstances.
had an ED that resigned. They were in tough fiscal issues that they were trying, their attention might have been turned to how do we make payroll this pay period as opposed to the external audit.
Yeah, that board was.
So what would be your suggestion? Leave it the way it is, or?
I think right now, leave it the way it is, because again, this was an outlier for this kind of, issues and this large a number. So I would say, let's leave it, again, because of 2 boards, we never had that in the.
Yeah, that's unusual. And there's an explanation for both of them.
Right, and maybe a few days late, but nothing like that. And those are the 2 that primarily sort of jumped out, because again, we need their numbers for cost reporting purposes.
Right.
The rest of these are private providers, and right now, what we say is our cost is what we paid you. Now, if that changes in the future, which Chris and I have talked about at like not even 50,000, 100,000 level, then we
That
may
would be
need
more.
a deeper dive, and that may be when we change the directive to say, you got to get it in here in time because we need that information to put in our cost report.
So in order to do that, if that became the issue, it's not complicated.
It's a change to the directive that we could anticipate moving towards that.
Okay.
We would, again, Chris and Schott would make the changes to the directive, and that would come to this committee for approval to then make recommendations to the full commission for approval.
And the directive is collaborative, by the way. Kevin and I and his team and my team, we all meet and go over proposed directive changes because he's looking at different stuff than we're looking at. It's just that we're the author of it.
Right, just like Chris was mentioning the training, it was collaborative training by both of our.
We
Yeah.
typically approve those revised directives.
Mhm.
Correct.
Yep.
Yeah.
Be around January, February,
Mhm.
we typically will do it.
Yeah. Here with y'all's recommendation to the full commission.
So we could maybe look at that in January and see if we want to change it.
Well, we'll have another year behind us, so we'll see, everything's due October 31st this year.
Right.
So we'll
I
know,
have another year's worth of data for you to say,
Right.
this is a problem or this was an anomaly.
Right.
Right,
Mhm.
because of COVID and, okay.
I don't know if COVID's to blame or the fact that I think
Right.
it's more like
Yeah.
the ED change.
That,
And then that tells us, though, we have a point. If we have a new ED, we have to make sure that we put that on their radar, so they know.
right.
So that gives us an orientation point.
All right, thank you, Kevin.
Mhm.
So can I get a motion to adjourn because we have completed our, meeting agenda?
So move.
I have a motion to adjourn.
Thanks, Barry!
All right, so, Ed made the motion, so I'll let you second it, Barry?
Stephanie
Technically?
would.
I'll second it then. So we're adjourned if I second it. There ain't nothing else to say.
Wonders of delay. All right,
Thank
thanks so
y'all.
much.
All right, thank you very much for being on the call. See you next week, Stephanie.
All right,
Bye.
see you then, thanks.
All righty, bye-bye.
All right, Steph.
Bye.